The drive up to northern Minnesota had taken us about 3 hours, but nobody complained. We'd been making this trip together for the past 2 years, ever since sophomore year when Brandon first suggested we needed an annual tradition that didn't involve getting drunk at someone's apartment. Mark rode shotgun and controlled the music, which meant we listened to a random mix of indie rock and songs from bands I'd never heard of. Jessica and Ashley shared the back seat, occasionally joining in when Mark tried to sing along to something particularly ridiculous. Chippewa National Forest was all around us as we turned off the main highway, with thick pine trees and rolling hills as far as you could see. I'd picked this spot because my dad used to bring me fishing here when I was younger, and I knew exactly where we could set up camp without dealing with crowded campgrounds or park rangers asking for permits. We pulled into the small clearing I remembered, maybe 50 yards back from the shore of Leech Lake. The water looked almost black in the distance, with occasional ripples from fish jumping. Perfect camping weather, cool enough that we'd actually want a fire, but not so cold that we'd spend the whole night shivering in our sleeping bags. Setting up camp took us about an hour. Mark and I handled the tents while the others organized our gear and started gathering firewood. Ashley had brought enough snacks to feed a small army, which was typical for her. She always worried we'd run out of food, even on a 2-day trip. Jessica tested her new camping stove twice, making sure everything worked properly before we'd actually need it for breakfast. Brandon got the fire going just as the sun started dropping behind the tree line. We'd timed it perfectly, early enough to set up in daylight, late enough that we could transition straight into campfire mode without any awkward downtime. I grabbed 5 lawn chairs from the back of my Jeep and arranged them in a loose circle around the fire pit. The flames caught quickly in the dry wood Brandon had chosen, lighting up our little campsite. Mark immediately started roasting marshmallows, even though none of us were particularly hungry yet. He just liked playing with fire. Remember that time in high school when you almost burned down your backyard trying to make s'mores? Ashley asked, settling into her chair with a satisfied sigh. Mark waved his stick dismissively. That was completely different. I had no idea that lighter fluid was flammable. That's literally what lighter fluid is for, Jessica said. Yeah, well, nobody told me it would make flames shoot 3 feet in the air. We fell into the comfortable rhythm of friends who'd known each other long enough that conversation didn't require much effort. Brandon shared updates about his internship at the engineering firm. Ashley talked about her art classes. Jessica complained about her organic chemistry professor, who apparently assigned homework designed to make students question their life choices. The fire burned steadily, popping occasionally when a pocket of sap heated up. I'd forgotten how relaxing this could be. No phones buzzing with notifications, no deadlines, just 5 friends sitting around a fire in the middle of nowhere. We should definitely do this more often than once a year. Mark had moved on from marshmallows to poking random sticks into the flames, watching them catch and burn. He did this every time we went camping, like he was conducting some kind of scientific experiment on combustion rates. Sometimes I wondered if he missed being a kid more than the rest of us. "Did you guys see that?" Mark asked suddenly, his voice cutting through Ashley's story about her roommate's weird boyfriend. "See what?" Brandon looked around our campsite, probably expecting to spot a raccoon or deer. Mark pointed toward the pine trees behind our tents. There was a light. Just for a second, but definitely a light. I followed his look, but saw nothing except darkness between the tree trunks. Probably just a reflection off the lake or something. No, it was definitely in the woods, like someone had a flashlight. Jessica leaned forward in her chair. Could be other campers. We're not exactly in the middle of nowhere. Maybe, Mark said, but he kept staring in that direction. It just seemed weird. Really brief, but bright. Ashley pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Well, as long as they stay over there and we stay over here, I don't see the problem. Mark nodded, but didn't look convinced. He had this expression he got sometimes when something bothered him, like he was trying to work out a puzzle in his head. I'd seen it plenty of times over the years, usually right before he decided to do something impulsive. We went back to talking, but Mark stayed distracted. Every few minutes he'd look toward the tree line, clearly hoping to see the light again. After about 20 minutes of this, he stood up abruptly. "I'm going to check it out." "Check what out?" I asked. "The light. I want to see what it was." Jessica shook her head. "Mark, there's nothing there. You saw a reflection or someone's headlight in the distance. Then it won't take long to prove me wrong." Mark was already moving toward his tent, probably to grab his flashlight. Brandon exchanged a look with me. We both knew that tone in Mark's voice. Once he got an idea stuck in his head, especially something mysterious or unexplained, he wouldn't let it go. Fighting him on it would just make him more determined. "Fine," I said, standing up and brushing off my jeans. "But when we spend 20 minutes walking around in the dark and find absolutely nothing, I'm blaming you for the mosquito bites." Mark grinned, like I'd just agreed to something fun instead of potentially pointless. "Deal." The others reluctantly joined us, more out of group solidarity than actual curiosity. We grabbed our flashlights and checked our phones for the time. 9:15. Not exactly the ideal hour for a nature hike, but Mark was right about one thing. If there was nothing to find, we'd be back at the fire within half an hour. Mark led us away from the campsite, walking with more confidence than I expected, given how dark it was between the trees. Our flashlights showed just pine needles and fallen branches ahead of us. The forest felt different at night, more enclosed and unpredictable. "Which direction was the light?" Brandon asked after we'd been walking for about 5 minutes. Mark paused and looked around, getting his bearings. "I think it was more this way." He turned slightly to the left and kept going. The bushes got thicker as we moved deeper into the woods. Low branches caught at our clothes, and more than once I had to duck to avoid getting smacked in the face by pine boughs. Ashley muttered something about spider webs, and Jessica kept asking if we were sure this was a good idea. "How much farther?" I called out to Mark, who was still leading our little expedition. "Not much. I think we're getting close to where I saw it." I wasn't sure how he could possibly know that, since everything looked identical in the dark. Pine trees, fallen logs, more pine trees, but Mark seemed determined to keep going, so we followed. We'd been hiking for maybe 20 minutes when Jessica's voice broke the silence. "How? What the hell?" Her flashlight beam swung wildly as she stumbled, catching herself against a tree trunk. "I just kicked something metal." We all gathered around her, pointing our lights down at the forest floor. At first, all I could see were the usual fallen branches and rotting leaves that covered everything. Then Jessica kicked aside some moss and junk with her boot. The metal shined dully in our flashlight beams. It wasn't just a piece of trash or an old can. It was clearly part of something bigger. We spent the next few minutes clearing away branches, moss, and years of built-up forest junk. What we uncovered made absolutely no sense. A steel door, set into the ground at about a 30-degree angle, like the entrance to a storm cellar. The metal looked old but solid, with heavy hinges and what looked like a serious lock. Whoever had built this thing wanted it to last. "What is this doing out here?" Ashley asked, echoing what we were all thinking. I crouched down and ran my hand along the edge of the door, feeling where it met the earthen frame. It's definitely not recent. This has been here for years. Brandon aimed his flashlight at the surrounding area, looking for any other signs of construction or human activity. "Think it's some kind of bunker?" "Only one way to find out," Mark said, reaching for the handle. I grabbed Mark's wrist before he could turn the handle. "Wait, maybe we should think about this for a second." The others clustered around the steel door, our flashlight beams creating a small circle of visibility in the darkness. Ashley crouched down next to me, running her fingers along the metal frame where it met the earthen sides. "This is really well constructed," she said. "Like, professionally built, not something someone threw together as a weekend project." Jessica aimed her light at the locking mechanism. "The metal's weathered, but look at those hinges. They're not rusted at all. Someone's been maintaining this." Brandon knelt on the other side of the door, examining the surrounding area more carefully. There's no way this is just some old root cellar. The engineering alone would have cost serious money. Mark moved impatiently beside me, his flashlight beam dancing across the steel surface. Which is exactly why we need to see what's down there. This could be something amazing. Or something dangerous, I pointed out. Come on, Tyler. What's the worst that could happen? We take a quick look, satisfy our curiosity, and head back to the fire. Jessica stood up and brushed dirt off her knees. I don't know. This feels like the kind of thing that ends with us on the evening news. Ashley laughed, but it sounded nervous. What would we even tell people? Hey, we found a random door in the middle of the forest and decided to break in. We're not breaking in, Mark said. It's not locked. Look. He was right. The handle moved freely when he tested it. No key or combination required. Whatever this was, someone had left it accessible. I studied the faces of my friends in the overlapping circles of our flashlight beams. Ashley looked intrigued but cautious. Jessica remained skeptical, arms crossed over her chest. Brandon appeared to be weighing pros and cons in his methodical way. Mark practically vibrated with anticipation. 5 minutes, I said finally. We go down, look around for 5 minutes, then come back up. And if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Mark's grin was visible even in the dim light. 5 minutes, absolutely. I pulled on the heavy steel handle, expecting resistance. Instead, the door swung open with surprising ease, revealing a concrete staircase that disappeared into darkness below. A faint electrical hum drifted up from somewhere deeper in the structure. Okay, that's definitely not normal, Jessica said. Electric lights lit up the stairway walls, making it bright enough to see the steps clearly. The concrete looked solid and well-maintained, nothing like the crumbling foundation I'd expected to find. Mark started down immediately, his footsteps bouncing off the walls in the tight space. The rest of us followed more carefully, our flashlights adding extra light to the working electrical system. The staircase went down about 15 feet before opening into a larger space. When we reached the bottom, I moved my flashlight across a surprisingly big room. Radio equipment covered 2 of the walls, very old-looking devices with analog dials and switches that belonged in a museum. Most of the equipment seemed to be working, with small indicator lights showing green and red across various panels. This is unreal, Brandon said, moving toward the nearest bank of radios. This stuff has to be from the 60s or 70s. Ashley stopped in the center of the room, turning slowly to take in the entire space. How is there electricity down here? We're in the middle of nowhere. I pulled out my phone to check the time and noticed immediately that all my signal bars had vanished. No service whatsoever, which seemed odd given that we'd had decent reception at the campsite. No cell signal, I announced. Jessica checked her phone and looked unhappy. Same here. Dead zone. The air felt surprisingly fresh instead of stale and musty like I'd expected underground. Somewhere in the walls, a ventilation system made a quiet noise, pushing clean air through the place. A large map of North America covered the far wall, like something from a classroom or government office. Red pins marked various spots across the continent, with handwritten labels too small to read from where we stood. Different colored lines connected some of the pins, making a complex web that didn't make any sense to me. Mark had moved to the radio equipment and was checking the controls more closely. Guys, some of these dials are actually warm, like warm to the touch. What do you mean warm? Jessica asked. I mean, someone's been using this stuff recently. These vacuum tubes generate heat when they're active. Brandon discovered a desk positioned near the center of the room, its surface covered with papers and what looked like a bound logbook. He opened the cover carefully and flipped through several pages. Most of this is in some kind of code, he said. Abbreviated entries, numbers, coordinates maybe. Look at this. He held the book open so we could see. The pages were filled with neat handwriting. but the entries looked like military shorthand mixed with technical jargon. Dates, times, location references, all organized in columns that suggested systematic record-keeping. November 15th, 2023, Ashley read from one of the more recent entries. That's like 3 weeks ago. I moved closer to look at the logbook over Brandon's shoulder. The entries went back several pages, all dated within the past few months. Whatever this place was, someone had been using it regularly and recently. This is seriously weird, I said. We're looking at a Cold War-era bunker that's apparently still operational. Mark had wandered over to examine the map on the wall, tracing the connections between pins with his finger. These pins cover the whole continent: Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, but also places in Canada, Montana, Oregon. Remote locations, Jessica observed, joining him at the map. All of them are in pretty isolated areas. Ashley remained near the radio equipment, careful not to touch anything, but clearly fascinated by the vintage technology. Do you think this is some kind of government thing? Like, still active government? Or military? Brandon suggested, closing the logbook and setting it back on the desk. The organization level here suggests serious institutional backing. I checked my phone again, hoping the signal might return, but found nothing. The electrical systems kept buzzing around us, lights steady and ventilation running smoothly. Everything about this place showed it was well kept and used often. We should probably head back up, Jessica said after we'd spent several minutes exploring the main room. We've satisfied our curiosity, and this is clearly someone's active facility. Mark looked disappointed but nodded. Yeah, you're probably right. Though I have to admit, I'm really curious about what else might be down here. What do you mean, what else? I asked. He pointed to a doorway on the other side of the room I hadn't seen before. There's more to this place. That looks like a hallway going further inside. We all looked where he was pointing. Sure enough, a narrow hallway ran past the main room, with the same lights as everything else. We couldn't see from where we stood how far it went, or what other rooms might be linked to this main area. 5 minutes is up, Jessica reminded us. Brandon was already moving toward the corridor, drawn by the same curiosity that had brought us down here in the first place. Just a quick look. We've come this far. Brandon had already headed toward the corridor before any of us could object. The narrow hallway stretched ahead, lit by the same electrical system that powered the main room. I followed him, just as curious as when we first came down here. Just a quick look, I called after him, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince the others or myself. Jessica sighed but joined us, Ashley close behind. Mark walked last with his flashlight. The hallway felt more cramped than the main room, with concrete walls on both sides. Our footsteps bounced around in the confined space, making a weird rhythm that carried from somewhere deeper inside. The air felt different here. We passed several doors, all looking the same. Heavy steel with simple handles, no windows or markings. Brandon tried the first one and found it unlocked. The room had 4 metal bunk beds lined up neatly. The mattresses looked recently used, with blankets folded at the foot of each bed. Someone's definitely been living down here, Ashley said, running her hand along one of the bed frames. The metal felt cold but clean, maintained rather than abandoned. The next room held more sleeping quarters, this time with 6 bunks. Personal items were scattered on some of the beds: books, clothing, small electronic devices charging from wall outlets. Everything looked organized and purposeful, not like temporary camping arrangements, but like permanent living quarters. Mark kept glancing back toward the hallway, his shoulders tense. This is really weird. Like, institutionally weird. We moved to the next door, which opened onto a small kitchen area. The sight inside made us all stop dead. A refrigerator buzzed quietly in the corner, its familiar electrical noise mixing with the background sound of the ventilation system. An electric stove sat against the far wall, and I could smell something cooking, or recently cooked. Ashley moved toward the refrigerator while the rest of us examined the other appliances. Everything looked functional and well-maintained. Clean dishes sat in a drying rack next to the sink. A coffee maker held what appeared to be fresh grounds in its filter. "Guys," Ashley called from the refrigerator, her voice tight with disbelief. "You need to see this." She had opened the door and was staring at the contents. Fresh milk sat on the top shelf, along with vegetables that looked like they'd been purchased within the past few days. Packaged food filled the lower shelves, and I could see expiration dates that were still weeks away. "That milk expires next Thursday," Jessica said, reading over Ashley's shoulder. I walked to the stove and leaned over the burner. A pot sat on the electric coil, and steam rose faintly from whatever was inside. The smell hit me immediately. Vegetable soup, warm and recently prepared. I put my hand near the surface and the heat was obvious. "This soup is still warm," I announced, like someone was eating it maybe an hour ago. Mark had moved to the kitchen doorway and was looking back down the hallway we'd come from. His flashlight beam swept the concrete walls nervously, searching for something the rest of us couldn't see. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked quietly. We all stopped what we were doing and listened. The bunker's systems continued their quiet buzzing, air moving through vents and electrical equipment maintaining its steady operation. Beyond that, I heard nothing. "Hear what?" Brandon asked. "Footsteps, like someone walking behind us." I strained to pick up any sound that might indicate another person in the complex. The ventilation system created a constant background noise that could potentially mask other sounds, but I couldn't identify anything that resembled footsteps. "I don't hear anything," Jessica said. Mark nodded but didn't look convinced. He kept his flashlight pointed at the hallway, his grip tight on the handle. "Maybe I'm wrong. This place just feels like someone's here." We kept exploring and found 2 more rooms that looked like storage areas with supplies. Canned food, medical stuff, camping gear, batteries, tools, everything someone would need to live underground for a long time. Everything was really well organized, all sorted and labeled. As we went deeper into the complex, Mark started acting weirder. He kept stopping to look behind us, getting more jumpy each time. He kept whispering about hearing things even though none of us could hear what was freaking him out. "There it is again," he said as we examined a room filled with communication equipment. "Did you hear it that time?" I paused and listened to the sounds in the bunker. Air circulation, electrical buzz, and the occasional creaking that buildings make. Nothing that sounded like people. "Mark, I think you're just on edge," Ashley said gently. "This place is weird enough without looking for extra reasons to worry." He shook his head, more forcefully this time. "No, someone's definitely here. I can feel them watching us." The corridor curved slightly ahead, showing more doors we hadn't checked yet. Mark stopped walking completely, pointing his flashlight at each doorway and the dark areas around them. "We need to leave," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Right now. Whoever lives here is still around, and they're hiding somewhere, waiting." Jessica moved closer to him, her expression concerned. "Mark, look around. We've been through most of this place, and we're clearly alone." "No," Mark insisted, backing toward the wall. "You're wrong. Someone's watching us from the shadows. I can feel their eyes on us." Mark pressed himself harder against the concrete wall, his flashlight beam jerking erratically across the ceiling as his breathing quickened. I watched his face in the overlapping circles of our lights, noting how his eyes darted between shadows that existed only in his imagination. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Look at me. There's nobody else down here." He shook his head violently, never taking his eyes off the corridor behind us. "You don't understand. They're moving closer. I can hear them whispering about us." Jessica walked toward him slowly, carefully. "We've been through every room. If someone else was here, we would have seen them by now." "No, no, no." Mark's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. They know how to hide. They've been watching us since we came down the stairs. They know we found their place. Ashley moved to my side, her face pale in the artificial lighting. The ventilation system continued its steady drone around us, making the same background noise it had since we'd entered the facility. I tried hard to hear whatever Mark thought he was detecting, but couldn't catch anything except the mechanical sounds of the bunker running. "Mark, listen to me," I said. "We need to head back to the surface. We've seen enough down here." He laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. "Oh, they'd love that. They want us to run back up those stairs so they can follow us. Then they'll know where our camp is." Brandon had been checking out the far end of the corridor, but now he turned back toward us looking worried. "Maybe Tyler's right. We should leave." "You're all blind," Mark muttered, his flashlight beam sweeping the walls in increasingly frantic patterns. "They're everywhere. In the walls, behind the doors, watching us through cameras we can't see." I looked at Jessica. Mark's paranoia had gone beyond simple nervousness into something more troubling. His voice had a sound to it I'd never heard before, like he was talking to people who weren't there. "Mark," Ashley said gently, "nobody's watching us. We're the only ones down here." He turned to look at her directly for the first time in several minutes, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. His eyes held a vacant quality, like he was looking through her rather than at her. "They told me you'd say that," he said. "They warned me not to trust any of you." "Who told you that?" Jessica asked. Mark smiled, but it wasn't his usual grin. This expression felt empty, mechanical. "The voices. They've been explaining everything to me, about what this place really is, about why we were brought here." I moved closer to Brandon, lowering my voice. "We need to get him out of here. Now." Brandon nodded, but kept his attention focused on Mark. "Mark, let's head back to the main room. We can discuss this upstairs." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Mark said, backing further down the corridor. "You're all part of it now. They've turned you against me." He started talking to himself in a low murmur, addressing someone none of us could see. The words were too quiet to understand, but his tone suggested he was having a detailed conversation about our presence in the bunker. "This is really bad," Ashley whispered. I nodded toward the corridor leading back to the main room. "Come on, let's head back up. Maybe if we start leaving, he'll follow us." We started walking slowly toward the exit, looking back to see if Mark would come with us. Instead, he stayed against the wall, still whispering to people who weren't there. His flashlight moved around on the concrete as he waved his hands at nothing. "Mark, we're leaving," I called back to him. "Come with us." He looked in our direction, but his eyes seemed out of focus, like he was looking at something else instead of the four of us standing in the hallway. "Go ahead. I need to stay here and listen to what they're telling me. They have important information about the surface world." Jessica grabbed my arm. "We can't just leave him." "We can't force him to come either," Brandon said quietly. "Maybe if we give him a few minutes to calm down, he'll realize he's alone and follow us up." I turned back toward Mark one more time. "Mark, we'll be in the main room. When you're ready, come find us and we'll all go back to camp together." He waved us away without looking at us, completely absorbed in his one-sided conversation. We had no choice but to continue toward the main room, hoping distance from the claustrophobic corridor might help him regain his composure. The main room felt larger after the cramped hallway, its radio equipment still making noise with the same electrical activity we'd discovered earlier. I checked my phone again and found the signal still completely dead. The time read 10:47 p.m., meaning we'd been underground for over an hour. "How long do we wait?" Ashley asked. "Give him 10 minutes, I said. "If he doesn't come back, we'll go get him." We sat down by the radio equipment, close enough to the corridor to hear if Mark called us. The minutes dragged by with just the hum of the bunker's systems in the background. We didn't hear anything from the hallway where we'd left him. After waiting what seemed forever, but was really about 5 minutes, Jessica looked at her watch. "I'm going back to get him." "We'll all go," Brandon said. We walked back down the hallway, our flashlights lighting up the same concrete walls and steel doors we'd checked out earlier. When we got to the spot where we'd left Mark, we found nothing. The hallway was empty, with just our footprints in the dust showing anyone had been there recently. "Mark?" I called. No response. "Mark!" Ashley shouted, loud enough that the sound bounced off the walls and created multiple echoes. Still nothing. We checked every room we'd already explored, the sleeping quarters, the kitchen, the storage areas. Each space looked exactly as we'd left it, with no sign that Mark had been there. We pointed our flashlights in every corner, trying to find places he might be hiding or spots we might have missed. "This doesn't make sense," Jessica said as we completed our second circuit of the corridor. "There's nowhere for him to go. We would have seen him if he came back toward the main room." Brandon stood in the center of the hallway, turning slowly to examine every surface. "Maybe there's another exit we haven't found yet." The possibility made me shiver. If Mark had found another way out of the bunker, he could be anywhere in the forest above us. With how he was acting, I was really worried about him being out there alone in the dark. "Let's search more systematically," I said. "Check every door again. Look for anything that might be a hidden passage." We split up, each taking a section of the corridor. I checked the walls between doorways, looking for seams or weird spots that might show hidden doors. The concrete felt solid and smooth under my hands, with no obvious breaks or changes. Ashley had moved to the far end of the corridor, beyond the rooms we'd already explored. "Hey guys," she called. "There's something weird back here." We all went over to her near what I thought was the end of the hallway. She was checking what looked like another storage room door, just like the others we'd already looked at. "This door is different," she said. "Look at the handle." She was right. While all the other doors had simple metal handles, this one had a more complex mechanism with multiple latches. It looked like the kind of door you'd see on a bank vault or secure facility. Brandon tried the handle and found it unlocked. The door swung open to a supply closet, but as we shined our flashlights inside, Ashley noticed something else. "The back wall doesn't line up," she said. "This closet is too shallow compared to the other rooms." She was right. The space looked cut off, like part of it had been walled off or hidden. Brandon moved past the shelves and felt along the back wall, looking for anything unusual. "There's definitely something behind here," he said. "The wall sounds hollow." After looking around for a few minutes, he found a section that moved when pushed. What we thought was a solid wall was actually a hidden door, painted and textured to look like the concrete around it. The hidden door opened inward, showing a room we didn't know was there. Our flashlights lit up a space about the same size as the sleeping quarters, but this one was used for something very different. A metal desk sat in the middle of the room, covered with papers, photographs, and what looked like surveillance equipment. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and several monitors were dark and quiet on shelves above the desk. Brandon went to the desk while the rest of us checked out the room. "There's a lot of paperwork here," he said. "Reports, charts, some kind of organizational documents." I went over to look and immediately felt scared. Among the papers were photographs, dozens of them, in neat piles across the desk. The top picture showed the four of us standing in the main room, looking at the radio equipment. Our faces were clearly visible, taken from an angle that showed the photographer had been watching us from a hidden spot. "These are us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica joined us at the desk, her flashlight lighting up more of the photographs. "When were these taken?" I looked at the image more carefully. We were wearing the same clothes, holding the same flashlights, standing exactly as we had been earlier in the evening. "Tonight. These were taken while we were down here." Ashley picked up another stack of photographs from the desk. These showed different people I didn't recognize, photographed in what looked like the same bunker. Some of them looked confused or scared. Others looked unconscious or worse. "Oh God," Ashley said, her voice shaking. "Look at these." The photographs in her hands showed people who were clearly not willing participants in whatever was happening in this facility. Some appeared to be sleeping or sedated. Others had the blank, empty expressions of people who were there physically, but gone mentally. Brandon had found another stack of images near the back of the desk. "Tyler, you need to see this." He held up a photograph that made my knees go weak. The image showed Mark standing in this very room, but his expression matched those of the unconscious people in the other pictures. His eyes looked empty, lifeless, like someone had taken away whatever made him Mark and left only a shell behind. Written across the photograph in red ink, in handwriting that looked rushed and urgent, were 4 words that made my stomach drop. "He is one of them." The photograph in Brandon's hands made me realize what was happening. Someone had been watching us since we got here, keeping track of us, taking pictures of our faces. I took the image from Brandon, he was shaking, and looked at Mark's blank face with those 4 red words written across it. "We need to leave," I said, my voice cracking. "Right now." I swept my hand across the desk, gathering as many photographs as I could carry. Some scattered to the floor, but I stuffed a good bunch into my jacket pockets. Evidence. We needed evidence of what we'd found down here. Proof that this place existed and that Mark hadn't just wandered off into the woods. Ashley grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my sleeve. "Tyler, what if they're still watching us? What if they're here right now?" I suddenly felt scared thinking about that. Whoever had taken these pictures could be anywhere in this complex, watching us through hidden cameras or hiding somewhere. The bunker seemed different now, not just some empty old place, but dangerous, and we had come in on our own. "Move," I said. "Everyone move." We ran. Not the careful way we were moving before, but a full sprint through the corridor toward the main room. Our flashlight beams bounced all over the concrete walls as we crashed past the steel doors, past the sleeping quarters and kitchen where warm soup still sat on the stove. The electrical noise that had seemed normal before now sounded scary. Brandon got to the main room first, breathing hard as he went straight for the staircase. I looked back quickly at the radio equipment, the map with red pins, and the logbook with coded writing. Then I followed everyone else up the concrete steps to get outside. The steel door was still open to the night air, just how we left it. Cold wind hit my face when I got out of the underground place, and I took deep breaths of the fresh forest air. The pine trees just looked like regular trees again, dark shapes against the night sky, not scary like I'd been thinking. Ashley moved away from the door and bent over, hands on her knees. What was that place? What did we just find? I pulled the steel door shut behind us, hearing the heavy lock click. It sounded so final. But Mark was still missing, and these photographs in my pocket might be the only way to convince anyone that something bad had happened to him. "We have to find Mark," I said. "He's out here somewhere." We spread out through the surrounding forest, calling his name into the darkness. Our voices bounced between the pine trees, coming back with no answer. Brandon went north from the bunker entrance, while Jessica headed south toward the lake. Ashley and I took the western approach, deeper into the forest where the bushes grew thicker. "Mark!" I shouted. "Mark, where are you?" Nothing answered except the wind through the branches and the distant sound of water hitting the shoreline. I pushed through tangled brush and stepped over fallen logs, looking around with my flashlight for any signs that he'd been there. No broken branches, no footprints in the soft earth, no pieces of torn clothing caught on thorns. We searched like that for hours, meeting up every 30 minutes to compare findings and change our search patterns. Jessica found a few areas where the bushes looked disturbed, but nothing clear enough to show someone had been there. Brandon found an old deer trail that led deeper into the forest, but after following it for half a mile, he saw only more trees and no trace of Mark. The temperature dropped as the night went on, and we were all getting tired. Ashley's voice grew hoarse from calling Mark's name. My legs hurt from pushing through the thick forest. But the alternative, giving up and leaving Mark out here alone, felt impossible. By the time the sky started getting lighter in the east, we'd covered every area we could reach near the bunker. No footprints, no personal belongings, nothing to show Mark had ever been in these woods at all. It was like he'd simply vanished the moment he'd walked away from us in that underground corridor. "We have to go get help," Jessica said as we gathered near the bunker entrance one final time. Her face looked drawn and pale in the pre-dawn light. "Real help. People with tracking dogs and search equipment." I nodded, though going felt like I was leaving Mark behind. The photographs in my pocket reminded me that whatever happened to him was bigger and more organized than just someone going missing. We hiked back to our campsite in silence, forgetting all our excitement about our yearly camping trip. The fire was now cold ashes, and our tents looked small and exposed in the morning light. Everything we brought seemed useless now. The camping chairs, the extra food, the games we planned to play. Packing took 15 minutes. We threw sleeping bags and supplies into the cars without being careful about organizing them. Ashley sat in the passenger seat holding her phone, checking over and over for signal bars that never showed up. Brandon loaded the last of the gear into the trunk while Jessica folded the tents quickly and neatly. The drive back to Duluth seemed to take forever. I kept the radio off, not wanting to hear music or news or anything normal while Mark was still missing. In the rearview mirror, I watched the forest get smaller behind us, knowing it had secrets we'd barely started to figure out. The Duluth Police Department sat on East Superior Street. We parked across the street and sat in the car for several minutes, none of us wanting to start explaining what we'd seen. "What exactly are we going to tell them?" Ashley asked. I pulled the photographs from my jacket pocket and spread them across my lap. The images looked even more disturbing in daylight, clear evidence that someone had been documenting people inside that underground complex. The picture of Mark stared back at me with those empty, lifeless eyes. "We tell them the truth," I said. "All of it." The front desk sergeant looked like he'd been working night shifts for decades. His name tag read Kowalski, and he listened to our story with the expression of someone who'd heard everything at least twice. When I reached the part about finding the underground bunker, his eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "So you're telling me," he said when I finished, "that you found some kind of secret government facility in the middle of Chippewa National Forest, and your friend disappeared after going crazy inside this facility?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," I said. I placed the photographs on the counter between us. "Here's proof. These were taken while we were down there." Sergeant Kowalski picked up the first photograph and looked at it closely. The image showed the four of us clearly, our faces, our clothing, our positions in the bunker's main room. He looked at it for a long time before putting it down and looking at the others. "Interesting," he said. "Where did you say you got these?" "From a desk inside the facility. There were dozens of them showing different people in the same location. Some of those people looked unconscious or worse." He nodded slowly, but I could see skepticism growing in his expression. "And this facility just happened to be perfectly lit and maintained, with fresh food and warm soup on the stove?" "Yes. In the middle of nowhere. No roads leading to it. No visible entrances from the surface. We found it by accident. Jessica kicked the door while we were walking through the forest." Sergeant Kowalski leaned back in his chair and studied our faces. "How much drinking was involved in this camping trip?" "None," Jessica said firmly. "We hadn't touched alcohol all day." "Any drugs, prescription medications, anything that might affect your perception or memory?" "No," I said. "We know how this sounds, but everything I'm telling you actually happened. Mark is missing, and these photographs prove something unusual is going on out there." The sergeant picked up the photograph of Mark again, the one with the red writing across it. "This writing looks fresh, like someone just added it recently." "Because someone did add it recently. Whoever's running that facility wrote those words after they did something to Mark. Or, Sergeant Kowalski said, setting the photograph down, someone in your group wrote those words as part of an elaborate prank. College kids trying to create a viral internet story, maybe get some attention on social media. I felt my face flush with frustration. This isn't a prank. Mark is actually missing. I understand your concern, the sergeant said. We'll absolutely file a missing person report. But my guess is your friend got spooked by whatever game you were playing and decided to head home early. He'll probably show up in a day or two with a good explanation for where he's been. He handed me a clipboard with forms to fill out. Mark's full name, physical description, last known location, contacts for his family. Basic information that felt inadequate for describing what had actually happened to him. What about investigating the site? I asked. Sending officers to look for this bunker? Based on these photographs and your story? Sergeant Kowalski shook his head. We don't have the resources to send search teams into the forest chasing urban legends. If your friend doesn't turn up in the next few days, we'll reassess the situation. I completed the paperwork while the others sat in plastic chairs near the window, looking tired in their slumped positions. Outside, early morning traffic moved through Duluth's streets. People going to work or running errands, living normal lives without underground facilities or missing friends. When I finished the forms, Sergeant Kowalski took them and added them to a stack of other papers on his desk. The photographs stayed where I'd left them, but he didn't collect them as evidence. Can I have those back? He asked, gesturing toward the images. I gathered the photographs and put them back in my jacket pocket. They felt heavier now, like carrying the weight of proof that no one would accept. We'll call if we hear anything about your friend, Sergeant Kowalski said. In the meantime, I'd suggest getting some sleep. You all look like you've had a long night. We walked out of the police station into the morning sunlight, no closer to finding Mark than we'd been hours earlier. The photographs stayed in my pocket, the only real proof that our experience in the bunker had been real. But without official investigation or support, they were just strange pictures that raised questions no one was willing to help us answer. 3 days without sleep had left me tired with dark circles under my eyes, but I couldn't stop thinking about that bunker. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's empty look in that photograph, those 4 red words written across his face. The police had dismissed us. Mark's parents thought he'd just gone somewhere to clear his head, and Jessica and Ashley had started giving me worried looks whenever I talked about going back to find more evidence. Brandon was the only one willing to listen, maybe because he'd seen the photographs up close, or maybe because he was just as worried about the whole thing as I was. When I called him Tuesday morning and asked if he wanted to drive back out there with me, he said yes pretty quickly. We need proof, I told him as we loaded his car with fresh batteries for our flashlights. Something concrete that'll make the cops take this seriously. He nodded, but I could see doubt creeping into his expression. What if we can't find it again? What if we just got lost in the woods and imagined the whole thing? I pulled the stack of photographs from my jacket pocket and spread them across his kitchen table. The images looked just as clear in daylight as they had that first night. Our faces, our clothes, our exact positions in that underground room. These aren't imaginary. Brandon picked up the picture of the 4 of us examining the radio equipment. I know, but Tyler, what if someone's playing games with us? What if this is all some kind of setup? Then we need to find out who's doing it and why they took Mark. The drive to Chippewa National Forest felt longer this time. Maybe because we both knew what we were looking for instead of just heading out for a fun weekend. Brandon kept the radio on low, filling the silence with generic morning talk shows that I couldn't focus on. My phone sat in my lap with the GPS coordinates I'd saved from our first trip, the little blue dot showing our location as we got closer to where everything had started. We parked in the same spot we'd used for camping, though someone had cleared away the remnants of our fire pit. The forest looked different in daylight. Less mysterious, more like regular Minnesota wilderness with pine trees and bushes that any hiker might explore on a weekend afternoon. It was about 50 yards from the shore, I said, checking my phone's compass app. Then maybe 20 minutes walking northwest through the trees. Brandon put on his backpack and followed me into the forest. Our footsteps crunched on fallen pine needles as we walked between tree trunks and over rotting logs. Everything looked sort of recognizable, but not exactly the same. The way outdoor places look when you're trying to find a path you'd only taken once before in the dark. After 15 minutes of hiking, I stopped and checked the GPS coordinates again. According to my phone, we were standing within 10 feet of where I'd marked the bunker entrance. But the ground around us showed nothing except typical forest stuff. Pine needles, scattered branches, a few large rocks that might have been there for decades. "This has to be the place," I said, walking in slow circles around the area. "The coordinates match exactly." Brandon knelt down and started clearing away pine needles with his hands, looking for any trace of the steel door we'd found. "Maybe it's just better hidden than we thought. Maybe there's a mechanism that closes it flush with the ground." We spent the next hour carefully searching every square foot within a 50-yard radius of the GPS coordinates. I kicked aside fallen branches and scraped away layers of rotting leaves, looking for metal or concrete or anything that might show people had built something here. Brandon poked the ground with a stick, checking for hollow spaces or strange textures under the forest floor. Nothing. Just dirt and roots and the normal pile of forest stuff you'd expect to find in any Minnesota woods. "Tyler," Brandon said finally, straightening up and brushing dirt off his hands. "There's nothing here." I pulled out my phone and double-checked the coordinates one more time. The little blue dot was right on top of the saved location marker, confirming we were in exactly the right spot. But instead of the small dip in the ground where Jessica had kicked the steel door, the ground here rose in a gentle mound, like someone had filled in a hole and then tried to make it look natural. The soil looked different too. Instead of the packed earth and pine needles that covered the rest of the forest floor, this area showed signs of recent disturbance. The dirt looked darker, looser, like it had been dug up and then put back. A few small plants grew in patches across the mound, but their roots looked shallow and recently transplanted. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the inconsistencies in the vegetation. "This whole area has been landscaped. Someone filled in the entrance and tried to make it look like nothing was ever here." Brandon crouched beside me and looked at the disturbed ground. "You're right. This definitely looks like construction work. But Tyler, who has the resources to completely remove an underground facility in 3 days?" The question made my stomach clench. Whoever ran that bunker had some serious power, enough to watch us while we explored their place, enough to make Mark disappear, and now enough to wipe away all signs they were ever here. I was scared thinking about how big this whole thing might be. "Government," I said. "Military. Someone with access to heavy equipment and cleanup crews." "Or someone who wanted us to think it was government or military," Brandon said. "What if this whole thing is some kind of psychological experiment? What if we're still being watched right now?" I looked around the forest with new worry, checking the tree line for hidden cameras or concealed observers. The pine trees looked innocent enough, but after finding those surveillance photographs, I couldn't shake the feeling that every shadow might hide someone documenting our return visit. We expanded our search area, hiking in wider circles around the GPS coordinates. If the bunker entrance had been moved, or if I'd somehow saved the wrong location, maybe we could find some other trace of the underground complex. Air vents, electrical connections, vehicle tracks from the cleanup crew, anything that would prove we hadn't imagined the whole experience. By afternoon, we'd covered nearly a square mile of forest without finding so much as a candy wrapper. The woods felt ordinary and peaceful, full of bird songs and rustling leaves and the distant sound of water lapping against the lakeshore. Nothing suggested the presence of secret facilities or missing persons or any of the sinister activities we'd witnessed just days earlier. Maybe we should head back, Brandon said as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. We've been looking for hours. I pulled the photographs from my pocket and looked at them again in the natural light. The pictures were still super clear. Concrete walls, radio equipment, and a map with red pins all over the Midwest. Mark's blank face looked back at me from the picture with the red writing, showing that something awful had definitely happened to him in that underground room. "These are real," I said, more to myself than to Brandon. I didn't imagine this. We didn't hallucinate spending an hour underground looking at Cold War radio equipment. Brandon sat down on a fallen log and pulled off his hiking boots to empty out pine needles. "I know the pictures are real. But Tyler, what if someone gave them to us? What if the whole bunker experience was staged to make us think we'd discovered something important? Why would anyone do that? I don't know. But it makes more sense than a secret government facility that can be completely erased in 3 days without leaving any trace." I wanted to argue with him, but exhaustion was starting to overwhelm my determination. We'd been hiking for hours without food or adequate water, and I was really disappointed we hadn't found anything. Still, these photographs were the only real proof that Mark's disappearance involved something more complex than a simple missing person case. "The pictures prove something happened," I said. "Even if we can't find the bunker anymore. These images show Mark in some kind of facility. They show all of us in a place that shouldn't exist." Brandon nodded, but I could see doubt growing in his expression. The longer we went without finding any supporting evidence, the more reasonable his skepticism became. Without the physical bunker to corroborate our story, the photographs started looking like elaborate props in an unexplained game. We hiked back to the car as it was getting dark in the forest. My legs ached from hours of searching and my throat felt dry from calling out measurements and coordinates to Brandon. The GPS coordinates on my phone still marked the exact spot where we'd found the steel door, but that location now contained nothing except a suspicious mound of recently disturbed earth. Brandon started the engine and turned on the headlights, illuminating the narrow forest road that led back to the highway. "So, what do we do now?" I looked down at the photographs in my lap, at Mark's empty eyes looking back at me in the dashboard light. Someone had written those 4 red words across his face for a reason. Someone had documented our presence in that underground facility and then erased all evidence of its existence. The complexity of the operation suggested resources and planning far beyond anything a group of college students should have encountered on a simple camping trip. But Brandon was starting to question whether any of it had actually happened. And without the bunker itself as proof, I couldn't blame him for his doubts. The photographs were real, though. Whatever else might be uncertain or explainable, I knew those images hadn't been faked or planted or created as part of some elaborate hoax. The pictures were real, and that meant Mark was still out there somewhere, part of something I was only beginning to understand. The photographs sat in a manila envelope on my desk, edges worn from handling. 6 months of pulling them out, studying every detail, searching for clues I might have missed. 6 months of Mark's empty eyes staring back at me from that red-inked image, and I still had no answers. My apartment was completely taken over by the investigation. Printouts covered one wall, missing person reports, forum discussions, satellite images of Chippewa National Forest. I'd mapped every detail I could remember about the bunker's location, checked the radio equipment against declassified military documents, and spent countless hours trying to decode the entries from that logbook. None of it led anywhere concrete. Mark's parents had stopped returning my calls after the 3rd month. His mom had been polite but firm during our last conversation. They appreciated my concern, but they needed to move forward and couldn't keep revisiting what had happened. His dad was more direct. He thought Mark had probably joined some commune or cult, maybe traveled to Europe without telling anyone. People disappeared by choice all the time, he said. It didn't always mean something terrible had occurred. The police had closed the missing person case in February. Officer Martinez explained their reasoning during a brief phone call. No evidence of foul play, no financial irregularities, No indication Mark had been taken against his will. His bank account remained untouched, but that only supported the theory that he'd planned his departure and was living off cash somewhere. The case file would remain open in their system, but they wouldn't be conducting any active investigation. "Sometimes people just need to start over," Officer Martinez had said. "College can be stressful. Maybe your friend decided he needed a different path." I tried to explain about the bunker again, about the photographs and the surveillance equipment, but Martinez had clearly read Kowalski's notes. They categorized our story as unreliable witness testimony, possibly influenced by stress or substances. The pictures were interesting, but they could have been taken anywhere and didn't prove the existence of any secret facility. That's when I'd turned to the internet. Reddit seemed like the logical place to find people who might believe an impossible story about underground government facilities. I'd posted detailed accounts on r Unresolved Mysteries, r Missing 411, and r Conspiracy, complete with edited versions of the photographs that hid our faces but showed the bunker's interior clearly. The responses were mixed, as you'd expect. A few users seemed genuinely interested and asked follow-up questions about the location and timeline. Several others offered theories about Cold War installations or modern black sites. But most people dismissed the whole thing as creative writing, an attempt to launch an ARG or viral marketing campaign. One popular comment called it decent creepypasta but needs better character development. It hurt more than I thought it would. These were communities dedicated to unexplained disappearances and government conspiracies, exactly the audience that should have taken our experience seriously. Instead, they treated it like entertainment, just another story someone had made up for internet points. Brandon had stopped taking my calls after I'd shown him the Reddit posts. Ashley and Jessica avoided the subject entirely when we ran into each other on campus. They'd all moved on, accepted that Mark was gone and that our memories of the bunker were somehow unreliable. I was the only one still thinking about what we'd found. But the photographs were real. I'd had them examined by a photo lab downtown, paid for professional analysis of the paper and ink composition. The images showed no signs of digital manipulation, and the paper stock matched Kodak products from the 1990s. Exactly what you'd expect from surveillance equipment installed decades ago. The photos were authentic documentation of our time in that underground complex. So I kept searching. I spent hours every night looking through missing person databases, trying to find patterns or connections that might explain what had happened to Mark. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System became my regular reading material. I studied faces and case details from across the Midwest, looking for anything that might relate to the organization that had operated that bunker. 3 weeks ago, I'd found the first match. I was looking through NamUs entries from Wisconsin when a face I knew stopped me. Sarah Chen, age 19, missing from Madison since October 2022. The database photo showed a young woman with short, dark hair and intelligent eyes, but I recognized her from one of the surveillance pictures I'd taken from the bunker's hidden office. In that image, she'd been sitting in what looked like the same sleeping quarters we'd explored, staring at the camera with the same empty expression Mark had worn. My hands were shaking so much I could barely use the mouse. I'd found actual proof that the bunker's activities connected to real missing persons cases. Sarah Chen wasn't some random face in a staged photograph. She was an actual person who'd vanished without explanation, and someone had documented her presence in that underground facility. I'd spent the rest of that night searching more carefully, comparing the faces from the bunker photos with missing person reports from across the region. By morning, I'd identified 3 more matches. James Rodriguez from Minneapolis, missing since June 2022. Angela Foster from Duluth, disappeared in August 2023. David Park from Milwaukee, last seen in March 2023. All of them young adults, all missing without a trace, all documented in those surveillance photographs as unwilling participants in whatever program the bunker had been running. The operation was much bigger than I'd first thought. This wasn't just about Mark or our accidental discovery. It was an ongoing system that had been taking people for years. Tonight, I'd found two more matches. Rebecca Martinez from Grand Rapids, missing since December 2022. Michael Torres from Eau Claire, disappeared in September 2023. Both faces looked back at me from their missing person reports with the same hopeful expressions their families had provided to investigators, but I'd seen them in those bunker photographs looking empty and blank, like something important had been taken from them. I suddenly realized something big. Whatever organization had run that facility was still active, still picking people from across the Midwest for reasons I couldn't understand. Mark hadn't been a random victim. He'd been chosen, just like all these others, to become part of something that took away who they really were. The red words written across Mark's photograph suddenly made sense. He is one of them. Not dead, but changed. Turned into whatever those blank-eyed people in the surveillance photos had become. Mark was still alive somewhere, but he wasn't Mark anymore. My first thought was to update my Reddit posts with this new information to show the skeptics that I'd found real evidence linking the bunker to actual missing persons cases. But as I went to open my browser, something else occurred to me. If this organization was still operating, still taking people, then they were probably monitoring online discussions about their activities. My detailed posts about the bunker's location and contents had been sitting on public forums for months, complete with photographic evidence of their surveillance equipment. I'd basically announced to them that I knew about their operation and was actively investigating it. I pulled up my Reddit account and began deleting posts as quickly as the site would allow. 3 detailed accounts across different subreddits, dozens of follow-up comments, and several private messages with users who'd asked for more information. It all had to go. Every trace of my investigation needed to disappear from the internet before they realized what I'd discovered about their missing victims. The deleting took over an hour, but I erased everything I could find. My account history looked clean again. Just a normal college student who occasionally commented on video game subreddits and local Minnesota posts. No mention of underground bunkers or surveillance photographs or missing persons connections. But the damage was already done. For months, my detailed accounts had been publicly visible to anyone who knew how to search for them. If the organization behind the bunker monitored internet discussions about their activities, and they almost certainly did, then they knew I'd been investigating them. They knew I had photographs from their facility, and now they knew I'd connected their operation to actual missing persons cases. I sat back and looked at the photographs spread across my desk. Sarah Chen, James Rodriguez, Angela Foster, David Park, Rebecca Martinez, Michael Torres, 6 people whose families were still hoping for answers, still believing their loved ones might come home someday. But I'd seen what those people looked like after the organization was finished with them, and I knew their families' hopes weren't going to come true. Mark was part of that system now. Somewhere out there, he had the same empty expression as the others, serving whatever purpose the organization had picked him for. The friend I'd grown up with, the person who'd organized our camping trips and made terrible jokes around the fire, was gone. What remained might have his face and body, but everything that made him Mark had been taken away. I couldn't save him. I couldn't save any of them. The organization had resources and abilities way beyond anything I could fight against. They could erase underground facilities in days, make missing persons cases disappear from official investigation, and apparently change human beings into something else entirely. My only advantage was that they might not realize how much I'd figured out about their operation. The smart thing to do was forget everything, delete the photographs, stop searching missing persons databases, and pretend the bunker had never existed, live with the knowledge that Mark was gone, and that I couldn't do anything to help him or any of the others. But the photographs were still spread across my desk, and I couldn't make myself destroy the only evidence I had. These images proved that somewhere in the Midwest, an organization was systematically taking people and changing them for reasons I'd probably never understand. Mark was part of that system now, alive but not himself anymore. and these pictures were the only record that he'd ever been anything more than someone who disappeared. I gathered the photographs carefully and put them back in their manila envelope. Tomorrow I'd probably have the strength to burn them, to accept that some mysteries were too dangerous to chase. But tonight, I needed to hold on to this proof that Mark had been real, that our friendship had mattered, and that something terrible had taken him away from everyone who'd ever cared about him. The envelope went back into my desk drawer, and I turned off the computer screen that had shown me too much truth for one evening. Outside my window, the world kept going like normal, with no idea that 6 people they'd once known were now something else entirely, serving purposes no one would probably ever know about.